Geordie Journo's back here at St James's Park, so often a happy hunting ground for Newcastle United, but after recent woes on the road, that transcribed back here on Tyneside this afternoon. 3-1 Boxing Day defeat to Nottingham Forest. It was going well when Alexander Isak gave Newcastle the lead from the penalty spot, but Chris Wood most certainly came back to haunt his former side here with a hat-trick. We don't see a lot of hat-tricks at St James's Park. Certainly didn't from Chris Wood during his time at the club.
Best performance at St James's Park by far.
It absolutely was. And yeah, a really... Is that as low as it's been for Newcastle United, Liam?
I think so. I think you've got to not only take this result in isolation and the performance in isolation, you've actually got to take the week and put it into context. So in my opinion, I think this is definitely up there with that grim week maybe towards the start of Eddie Howe's campaign, where it was a Cambridge and then the Watford one here.
Yeah,
that was a grim week in that first season. But I think given the context and expectation and things like that, to have not, in my opinion, not laid a glove on three struggling teams. I include Chelsea in that in the Carabao Cup, where Newcastle United, in my opinion, almost in many ways surrendered their place in the Carabao Cup. It was an individual mistake that cost them, but affording a team like Chelsea, who, if anybody watched them on Christmas Eve, will know they were awful against Wolves defensively. To have surrendered about what felt like 95% possession at times in that game to a team so poor was a surrender, in my opinion. To then follow that up with having lots of ball at Luton but barely laying a glove on them, creating maybe 1, 2... How many chances? Didn't really create any.
Very few.
Very
I think
few.
they had 2 shots on goal.
To do that at a team who will fight relegation this season in the Premier League, and then another team who are in that relegation fight mix, to come here at St James's Park, who've got an awful record away from home, and to have been beaten, and not just beaten, but beaten comprehensively. I don't think that was close, and I say not lay a glove. They did not get close to laying a glove on Nottingham Forest. Newcastle went 1-0 up, and it never felt sustainable because it was Forest who were constantly creating the problems and chances on the break. I think this, as you quite rightly point out, Dom, is up there with some of the worst sequences of results and performances under Eddie Howe. And for me, he's a manager who needs to find some answers. We'll probably come on to this, but I think there's a lot of talk in the social media. We did a live earlier. Of course, Jordan Cronin, who doesn't join us here, was in that live. He's got a couple of prior arrangements, a family party or two.
He's drowning his sorrows, I think so. Most of Tyneside will be after the past week.
I think it's a problem for Eddie Howe. There's more questions than he seems to be able to find answers, and there's problems all over the pitch. They look like a team who are easy to score against, and they look like a team who the goals have dried up. And it was almost paper in the cracks, feeling like it's okay, we're at home this week and we'll fall back on that. Well, the game's come thick and fast now, and 3 of the next 4 away from home in very losable games. Newcastle United, as you pointed out before the game, were the team that everybody didn't want to play.
Yeah,
probably even up to about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and now it feels like they're the team that everybody does want to play.
Yeah, even San Marino having a bit of banter, a fan account on Twitter, which says everything you need to know. It's just a tough spell. It's not just the manner of defeats, it's who they've been beaten by. We're looking recent results, okay, Everton with a points deduction, but teams who have started the day in the bottom 4 in the Premier League, Everton, Bournemouth, if you go back a month, Luton, Nottingham Forest, they're getting not just beaten by these teams, but with the exception of Luton, where they opened the scoring and hung on, they're getting steamrolled by these teams a little bit. I thought Bournemouth could have been 5 or 6. I think Everton, okay, it finished 3-0. It was probably a tight game before that, but then today, I think Forest at 3-1 always still look the more likely team to score. Newcastle had a couple of openings in the second half, but half chances at best, really.
You say that about the Everton game, I was just going to come in there, but Newcastle gifted a lot of chances in that game too. Yeah. If Dominic Calvert-Lewin had his finishing boots on that night, he probably would have scored well before Everton did. Of course, Newcastle had their own chances to kill that game, and you can argue maybe they did in this game.
It's fine margins, isn't it?
Less so, and yes, how much of a justification? It's one of the big debates on social media at the moment is about the idea of, for me, fatigue and the talking of fatigue and tiredness is growing very tired and fatigued in itself. That the season will not come with an asterisk at the end of it, as I mentioned in a previous video, of like, oh yes, they had X amount of players out for most of that season. No, it'll read as it reads that they didn't make it through in the Champions League group stages. They surrendered their place in the Carabao Cup, which was all but secured. And I think if they'd been more proactive in that game, it wouldn't have been relying on Chelsea on a 1-0 goal lead. If they'd actually been proactive in that game, they would have put Chelsea to the sword. But they didn't have that in their locker. But then all of the fatigue and the things like that fall down for me, because when you get to games like this, yes, they've had to flog certain players. Yes, certain players will be tired. Certain players have probably been used more than they should, have been carrying injuries and playing on, and have just come back from injuries. But any Newcastle United team in the level that they've been performing at should be able to get results against Luton away and Nottingham Forest at home. And they haven't looked close to getting results in those games. They've scored 1 goal in the 2 games and arguably created 3 or 4 clear-cut chances. That is not good enough. Nowhere near good enough. And Eddie Howe needs to find the answers to that. And for me, I think a lot of the blame for today's result falls on his shoulders. And people might think that's harsh, they might not. But what I'm going to caveat that with is, there's been no bigger champion of Eddie Howe and his wins and his positivity when things have gone well than me. So what I'm going to say is, this criticism is well deserved. I thought a lot of the problems that were caused today were on Eddie Howe's shoulders. Yes, they haven't had a load of build-up time, much like every team in December. It's a crazy month. But to think that Newcastle United could counter Nottingham Forest's counter-attacking speed on the break by just going gung-ho with the midfield, etc., was utter lunacy, in my opinion. I think Elanga v Dan Burn looked suicidal from early on. It was just asking for trouble, and I think every person who was in these seats behind us here could see that early doors. So then what I want from my manager is somebody to see the same problems that I'm seeing and change it. Where were the in-game changes? It was so obvious to see that the midfield was overcommitted in many areas. And I don't have any problem with Bruno playing 25 yards further up the park at home. More as a number 10 than a 6 today. But in those situations where your fullbacks are getting rinsed at times by the speed, drop Sean Longstaff in there and tell him to do a job and cover his fullbacks and cover the men. It didn't work. He didn't do that. And he changed personnel but didn't change system and didn't change style. And really, throughout the game, there was only one team going to score. It was not Newcastle, really. It was, if anything, it was probably Forest were going to add to the goals that they scored. Really well deserved. They played really well, Nottingham Forest, but I kind of get the sense, having especially taken control in the game, that Newcastle United should have more about them than that. They shouldn't be surrendering positions like what they found themselves here, but they've done it a few times. That's 3 games this season now, Dom, where they've surrendered positions of power at home. Yeah. AC Milan, Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. And in all circumstances, they've been poor in some way, shape or form, whether that be naivety or whether that be a lack of tactical nous. But why is this Newcastle team not able to adapt and change during games to alter the course of things moving forward? That falls on the manager for me. And he needs to find some answers to those glaring problems, because it's only going to become a bigger and bigger problem from moving forward, especially when you look at the fixture list.
Yeah, I think Newcastle's biggest strength for so long, the way they play, the intensity, the sort of how tightly wound they were under Eddie Howe, has sort of become the biggest weakness in recent weeks, where they've become predictable. And I think teams have sussed Newcastle out this season, whereas last season a lot of teams just didn't have the answers. And it's probably telling today, Elanga, often used on the left wing, deployed over on the right today and was so effective. So that simple change has ultimately won Forest the game, and they've exposed a weakness or weak area at what they felt was against Newcastle today. So yeah, I think teams who may not have the same level of players as Newcastle are being able to outsmart Eddie Howe and his Newcastle team more and more frequently this season, which is probably a big concern. And you look at Eddie Howe and however good he's done over such a long period for Newcastle, I've said time and time again, he's not one to outthink opposition teams. His players outwork opposition teams, outfight them, but they haven't done that in recent weeks. And almost our worst fears with Eddie Howe are sort of rearing their head a little bit. over the past month or so. So,
look, I think that's...
Does he have those answers? I think that's a big question.
That's the thing, Dom, right? So this isn't an absolute slaughter job on Eddie Howe, because a lot of the positivity that's gone before doesn't suddenly go out the window when things go really badly, but it is a crisis time. There is no getting away from it. A team of the calibre that he built, and the reputation and the expectation that comes with that, rightly so, given the performances and levels that they've been at, to lose 6 games out of 7 and be dumped out of 2 cup competitions is nowhere near good enough. And
based on the standards he's set.
Yes, well. And I do believe that it's right to question whether things are right going forward. I don't necessarily think that means that all of a sudden the pressure piles on them, but it would be interesting to see if they don't get results in the next 4 games, which look bloody difficult on paper, as to where that cash in the bank idea, I'm not talking literal here, I'm talking about the cash in the bank that Eddie Howe's had because of the positivity. But were they suddenly to go on a run where you start losing 10 out of 11, excuse me, then how much does that cash run out? And where do they go? I personally, looking at it, I think he's probably got enough cash in the bank for the season, and I think he's probably earned the right to right the wrongs of recent times. But I think it's only fair that there's questions raised that at the moment, in the last few games, in the last few weeks, injuries and fatigue, as I said earlier, that was growing tired, but they have obviously played a part. And it probably is only fair to start judging when they do get the players back. The season isn't over. Eddie Howe can right the wrongs of recent weeks. But I do feel that it will be interesting to know where the team confidence, etc., and the crowd and the supporters' confidence would be at if they do go on a run of 10, losing 10 out of 11, because that is relegation for me. That doesn't happen to teams who finish in the Champions League or European spots. Where will they be in the league? They'd potentially even be out of all competitions, really, which would be quite incredible, having had everything at their fingertips at the start of December. I think there's a feeling among the fan base that there is a bit of tension there. People are a bit worried about the future direction of this team, because they're coming up against teams who aren't anywhere near as good as them on paper, aren't anywhere near as good as them in the Premier League. You can see the facts prove for themselves. And they're not even getting close to finding the answers to problems, the smallest of problems in games that are being posed. I mean, this wasn't some technical masterpiece by Nuno Espirito Santo. This was, let's play quite direct, with straight balls down the middle, and get our wingers one-on-one with the fullbacks. Where was Eddie Howe's answers today? It's fair to say when he's outthought, or his team put in performances, we shout about it from the rooftops. This was the exact opposite. It was the antithesis of what a Newcastle United team, the identity of it. It was the antithesis of that today. The intensity is gone. The level of performance is gone. The quality at the back, which was a cornerstone of success last season, has gone. The quality in the final third, which was a cornerstone of success even at times this season and the back end of last season, has disappeared. Yes, they haven't had the personnel. They've had a lack of options. But teams find answers. Good managers find answers. You will not see, I guarantee you now, you will not see Manchester City go on a run like what Newcastle have had. You would not see Jurgen Klopp's teams go on a run like what Newcastle have had. You wouldn't see, even, let's go right down as far as Manchester United aren't on the type of runs that Newcastle United are. They'll pick up the odd result and the odd win, hence why they'll probably end up finishing above Newcastle United this season, despite being awful in the large part. Where are the answers? And Eddie Howe needs to find them. A lot of fans will fall back on the ideas. They don't know if Eddie Howe is the man to have the answers. We've talked about this all the way through, that he's a man who's having to learn on the job, and at every single step has to keep proving himself, because even in the owner's eyes, he wasn't the number one choice for the job, but he's come in and done arguably as good a job as I think anybody could have done. An incredible team to have turned from a performance from a manager to have taken them from where he has to where they go to. But he's taken them to that step, and then to take a major step back would be a huge blow, and it would immediately bring pressure. Is he facing up to the idea of the success of last season? He's almost a victim of that in many ways. But people would take a small step back to then continue moving forward, and that's the biggest challenge that he's got. Is this going to be too big a step back? Because you couldn't finish outside of Europe this year, having got into the Champions League last season, and it'd be deemed a success, and not in some way, shape or form have a run in the cups. Yes, the run to the quarterfinals of the Carabao Cup was commendable, but it almost felt like a par score. It wasn't. If they've got to a semi-final, it's a good run. A quarterfinal felt like something they probably should be doing at the stand and they find themselves. Maybe it's not built on a solid foundation and they are ahead of schedule, etc. But Eddie Howe needs to find these answers, because if he allows a team to slip and slide and go on a run, like I say, of 10 and 11, there will be rightful questions asked about him, and there'll be fans falling back on their original idea that, oh, is he the man? He's never proven this in his career, that he can operate at the level that Newcastle United want to be operating at. And at every turn, he's going to have to keep proving to everybody that he can, and the onus is on him.
Yeah,
it's his team that he puts out, and they need to keep proving that they can operate at that level, which they haven't done for quite a while now.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the cash in the bank side of things, because Eddie Howe, that question was posed to him in terms of his players having cash in the bank, and Eddie Howe basically played that down and said you have to take it on a short-term, game-by-game form basis, rather than this player did well for me 12, 18 months ago, rather than you have to look at the here and now. So I think Eddie Howe's almost made things more difficult for himself by saying that. And it's almost, if you're looking at it now, Newcastle haven't been performing anywhere near the standards Eddie Howe's side you'd expect from them over the past 12, 18 months. So yeah, it was interesting. And Eddie Howe was also, a question was posed to him about the intensity is our identity. Where has that intensity gone? And I was almost taken aback by Eddie Howe's answer, because he said that quote, intensity is our identity, is not his. It's not a quote attributed to him, which I feel like
we might have to do a bit of revising of that, because I'm sure it was very close to that at least.
Yeah, well, his response was that's not my quote. So basically something Newcastle have built their foundations on over the last 2 years, basically, is something Eddie Howe's now distancing himself from. I thought it was an interesting answer.
So what I'm going to say now, Dom, is where do we go from here? As a team, where does Eddie Howe go from here? Because we're looking at a January transfer window, which opens, in less than a week. They're going to have to give this team, for me, a mid-season kick up the backside.
Yeah.
There needs to be an injection of something. For so often, the way that they scout, the way that Eddie Howe wants things is he wants players who he's looked at for a long time and he knows exactly fit in. They almost need a transfer window, for me now, like what they had the first one, where they just plug gaps. They're going, right, just get somebody and get this, get that. Let's just try and build a bit of momentum, more than probably what the transfer window was this time last year, where it was a bit, if they can bring some quality, we'll do this, we'll do that. And that's kind of where I think they went wrong in the summer, is that they've targeted the wrong type of players and they've made a couple of mistakes. For me, they need a little bit of a firefight window this January, just to kick-start things. But I'm not really sure that's the way they're willing to operate. And I think that probably has to, for me, in my opinion, would have to change.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest concern, really, where you look at this run and you look at what's to come in January, not only on the field, but transfer-wise. And Eddie Howe, the way he's speaking, obviously take whatever he says with a pinch of salt in regard to transfers, but he was like, potentially the back end of the window, we might look to do something. We're hoping to have players back. But you're looking at the players coming back from injury, hopefully in the next month or so. Are they the answer? I'm not sure.
How many of them... So this is the question we've got to ask, Tom. How many of the players coming back from injury start?
I think a fully fit Joe Willock makes a difference in this side.
Yeah. But the rest...
Harvey
that's
Barnes
probably Newcastle's team, apart from Joe Linton.
Yeah.
Would you not argue?
No, I would, yeah.
Nick Pope, obviously,
yes.
is look. The form since Pope dropped out the team is telling. Is there a lack of confidence in that back four? Is it being
the lack of sweeping? I think probably exposes them a little bit. And we saw at times Mont Dubravka made a couple of very good saves in the game, but you see Chris Wood's bearing down on goal. He's so hesitant coming off his line, Mont Dubravka. So
came for things he didn't need to, and didn't come for things he should. And
silly. But yeah, I think that's a big worry, where January, it doesn't look like things are going to get better for Newcastle. Hopefully they will. Hopefully this run of form will convince them to actually get the thing out and do some business. But whether they have the ability to do that is another story, because on the transfer front, things are quite quiet at the moment, and certainly doesn't look like they're going to make any transformative signings in the same way they they did that first transfer window in January where the likes of Kieran Trippier, Chris Wood, and
Bruno
being the big one.
Dan Burn was a big signing at the time as well. It really plugged the gap. Matt Target did great for 6 months. They went out and signed 5 players and made a difference. The problem with the last window is they signed 4 and only one's made a difference. And he doesn't even start on their full strength. So big mistakes. And it was often said, I think it was one of the directors or owners, it might have even been Mehrdad Quddusi, said, we can't make mistakes in the transfer window. Problem is, the way season sits now is they made 3 out of 4. That's a big issue, and they're actually paying it always comes back down to the idea: did you strengthen enough, and they didn't. Even with a pile of injuries, if they'd signed another player but Lewis Hall, who might come good in time, but they need a player now. If they'd signed another player who could play, they wouldn't have as many pressures. Fact is, he doesn't trust them to play. Doesn't trust them to play at the moment. Even just throws them on in games like this when it's almost like the last resort, you feel, in certain games when he throws them on. I don't know, Dom. I'll probably go around in circles, but I think January is a big window, and I'm not really sure that the noises that you hear, it doesn't sound like it will be a big window. Let's hope they're doing cards close to the chest thing, which they tend to do at times, and they do go and sign players, but the idea that this club is in a position, which I've argued many a times before, the idea that this club is yet in a position where it can go out and sign, cherry pick one bit of quality and sign that per window, it's nowhere near yet. They need to go out and sign 3 or 4 players to keep improving. They can't just go and cherry pick one and expect that to make a difference. It needs to be more of a firefighting window, and if they have to plug gaps in holes in the squad, I think they just need to go and do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Whether they will or not is another question, and that's probably the main concern. But moving on,
I think we've got to.
Liverpool on New Year's Day. You're looking forward to that? Just doesn't. If it doesn't rain, it pours, doesn't it? Not. But
and this is the problem that I've got as a journalist and fan in many ways, is that there was a veneer there that was thin, but it was always, even when things were going bad, there was a bit of a fallback. You thought, oh, it's all right. It will,
especially here,
it will come good. 6 defeats in 7 has meant that veneer has eroded for me. I don't necessarily think the bounce is guaranteed. I think the problems are deeper than that. I think there's a real loss of confidence in this squad after the dents that they've taken in the cup competitions, etc. I think that's evident in players like Miguel Almiron, who, yes, lacks quality. We've known that. We know what Miguel Almiron is. But even in the level that he's at, the wrong decisions he's making, the lack of confidence.
That's what it is.
It is incredible to see. And there's others. Anthony Gordon isn't quite fit producing. Isak was the only one. I mean, Bruno tried to make things happen. Miley, you can't really fault his performance for a young lad. Sean Longstaff.
For 40 minutes, they were actually all right.
I love Sean Longstaff. He's way off it in the last few games. I love a lot of other players. I've got a lot of positivity for Dan Burn. I think he was hung out to dry a little bit today, but he was poor for that second goal. Christ, it was he made terrible.
Chris Wood look like Alexander Isak.
He did. Wow. Oh, God. Chris Wood.
Watch that goal back. It was like Alexander Isak v Villa. It was like a carbon copy.
Very good. I've got a lot of time for a lot of the players. Kieran Trippier I've got a lot of time for, but again, he's a fall for one of the goals today.
Yeah, playing it on.
Playing everybody on.
Well, Kieran Trippier, I thought it was interesting after the game. He admitted his own standards are way off, backs himself to bounce back, but he probably would have said that a month ago. And where's that bounce from Newcastle and from Kieran Trippier as well? Often such a reliable player, but it's just, we're almost clutching at straws at Luton where we're like, he had an all right game, but
it's the forward stuff. He's great going forward.
Yeah, he can.
It's the defensive stuff where, if you actually analyse his career as a whole, he's always kind of let himself down a little bit. Where the attacking stuff's always been negated by some of his poorer defensive work. We hadn't seen that in Newcastle. He was a defensive rock for so long, probably playing the best football of his career, and he's having a real struggle at the moment. I didn't think he was particularly bad in the game, apart from that one moment. I think there was worse players on the pitch. But yeah, there's a lot of questions, and Eddie Howe is a man who has to find the answers. It's not us. It's not all of you guys who sit out there or watch on here. That we just analyse it and see what we see, and I think the team deserves a fair bit of criticism, and I think that falls on the manager's shoulders largely as well, particularly for the way that he set his team up and didn't didn't see the same issues that I think everybody else was screaming at him in this stadium. Right.
Had enough, Liam.
I've had enough as well. I think everybody's had enough. If you watch this, I hope you enjoy it.
We spoke yesterday about how great 2023 has been for Newcastle, but it's just...
2023 has not been as good as 2022. Because I think from...
It's had higher highs.
It's had higher highs and lower lows. From March to the World Cup, the season previous, it was such a... There was no dips in that roller coaster, really, apart from a few draws at the start of the season and the odd defeat at the back end of that season. This last year has gone up very high and down very low at times. There's been some of the worst performances under Howe in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
Bournemouth away, dreadful. This today, dreadful. Luton, dreadful. Chelsea was rubbish. Let's not try and butter it up. It was rubbish. The team there for the taking, they surrendered against Chelsea, but then smattered in there as a win against PSG and wins at Manchester United and things like that were incredible.
Yeah, I was just about to say the Fulham win recently, that one win in the last 7, papers over the cracks, have been against 10 men.
I was on a silver platter, as I said before, 10 men for 75 minutes or however long, it might have even been longer, that you should be able to knock down the door against a team who'll finish halfway down the league at home with an extra man. So you should. It was a decent, they unlocked the door and it came at a good time and it relieved the pressure. As a win against Forest would have done ahead of a tough run of fixtures, but they haven't done that. They're going to a tough run of fixtures having no one but themselves to blame because they've had 2 games whereby they've played 2 teams in the bottom 4 and could have relieved the pressure on themselves going into a tough run. They haven't done that.
Picked up no points, conceded.
Scored once.
And scored from the penalty spot.
Scored a penalty and created probably 4 clear-cut chances across 180 minutes against 2 teams who will fight relegation. Not good enough. Anyway, like, comment, share, subscribe for all the positive Geordie Journos content.
Yes, me and Jordan will be at the press conference on Friday ahead of Liverpool, where I'm sure Eddie Howe will be asked some interesting questions as he looks to end an 11-game losing streak, against Jurgen Klopp's side. So yeah, please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell.
Enjoy your little break, your mini break, which you'll get from Geordie Journo's content over the next few days. We'll try and enjoy our little mini break from it before it's back pedal to the metal ahead of Anfield, of all places, where Newcastle United traditionally always get results. We're looking forward to that as much as you guys are. Right, like, comment, share, subscribe for all your Geordie Journos content. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sticking by through all the tough times. But we'll still be there. The Geordie Journos will be there, good, bad, or indifferent, following this old team behind us.